This one. Yeah, I think you have to approve that, David. I appreciate that very, very much. And here we are, and here we are, and here we are, and here we are. Ladies and gentlemen, as promised, I have on the Louis B. Free Radio Show, Brain Food from the Heartland, the author of Rock and Roll Warrior, My Misadventures with Alice Cooper, Prince, George Clinton, Living Color, The Runaways, and more, David Libert. David, good morning. Welcome.
Thanks, Louis. Good to be here.
I am honored and delighted. Your book it's just amazing. It's such a wonderful read, and I love your style. By the way, I've got to say again, your style of writing is a lot of fun. A lot of interesting things. A lot of
Thank
fun
you.
Also. I've got now. This may be a very odd place for me to start, David. Let me just check one thing. I've got now. Okay, this may be a very odd place to start, because I loved reading about the history. I loved reading about the happenings. Yet I have to start here. When I really came to love you, I will say, was when I saw the picture in the book, Rock and Roll Warrior, Harold, Barney, and Trundle. The joy they bring into my life is immeasurable. Your dogs. That's so touching. Yeah. Do you mind if I start there?
You can start anywhere you want, Louis.
That just touched me really, really deeply. That's a beautiful. What can you tell us about the dogs?
Well, I've been an animal person my entire life. I've always had dogs. I've even had my share of cats here and there. When I left LA several years ago and moved to the high desert out here by Joshua Tree, I became sort of semi-retired for the most part, and found myself getting more and more involved with rescue organizations, and I've become pretty much an animal rights advocate in the process. The three dogs that I have, Harold, Barney, and Trundle, are rescues.
Beautiful.
They're wonderful dogs, and they fill a great big piece of my heart. Dogs are just incredible creatures. They're really the best of things that this world has to offer, and for that reason alone, I think they deserve the very best that we can give them. And I think Harold, Barney, and Trundle will attest to the fact that they're living a pretty good life out here in the desert. I have a huge fenced-in backyard and a big doggy door, so they can go in and out as they please, indoors, outdoors. So, and they're very highly socialized. And I think the way you bring up a dog attests to the kind of temperament they have. And they're very, Harold may be 90 pounds, but he's just a big, mushy mushroom baby, just a big cuddle bug. He thinks he's a lap dog, but he isn't. He's too big for that. So I'm really happy that I'm surrounded by canine out here, and along with my girlfriend Angie, and we live a pretty nice leisurely life out here, I'm happy to say.
That's beautiful. When I read that about your animal advocacy, et cetera, and I saw that about the dogs, I have to tell you, David Libert, I love that. There's something about the love of an animal. There's something about, and let me see if I can make this really, really brief. I've had dogs, some cats, and for probably about 2 decades, we took in rescue rabbits that needed rescued. And there was one that came from a really horrific background. They all came from bad backgrounds, obviously.
Yeah.
But there was one that had been, and I'm not going to go into depth about it, it was horrific. And when I first brought her in, when she would see my hands, she would back up and scream. And anyone that's ever heard a rabbit scream, I mean, it's blood curdling. It's just and they can die from fright. Bottom line is, David Libert, is after a lot of gentle care and just letting her adapt, he went from frightened and screaming when she saw my hands to when I was getting ready to go out, leave in the morning. I have a backpack with my stuff in for work, throw it on. She'd run over and pull on my pant leg and get down for pets. So I, of course, get down and pet her. I get back up. I throw the backpack back on again and again. Because the way I interpret it, and again, with your rescues, with dogs, with cats, it's like, yes, some men hurt me very badly, but it wasn't this guy. Not this guy. This guy loves me. And I just think with animals can be, I don't want to say, I'll say different than humans. People have a bad relationship or hurt in a relationship. I'll never love again. I'll never open my heart again. Animals will, with gentle care. And
and not only that, but they have the ability to be grateful. That's an emotion that animals possess.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. I know that's probably a very strange way to start the interview. But I've got to tell you, I love the work and I love what you do. And when I saw that and read about that and saw that picture, it blew me away. So take me back, David, Bert, and let's go back to the happenings. And wow, you brought back all kinds of memories with the songs, etc. Take me back to your musical life.
Well, very early in my life, I was 6 or 7 years old. My father, who was a lawyer by trade, possessed the ability to play songs on his violin by ear. And he realized, I guess both my parents realized pretty early in the game there, that I too possessed that same talent. I could play on the piano virtually any song that I was familiar with in just about any key. And by the time I was 8 or 9 years old, I could put in the accompanying chords to go with the melody. So my parents didn't pressure me, but they lightly encouraged me. Perhaps I should take piano lessons. And I agreed. The only stipulation was that if I agreed, I would not be allowed to quit until they said so. But I agreed. And that turned out to be, that went on for about 8 years or so of classical piano lessons and chord theory. My piano teacher decided to try to develop my ability to play by ear by teaching me chord theory, which was a really good thing. And that 8 years actually turned out to be the education that allowed me to have a career in the music business on both sides of the microphone, I might add.
Forming the happenings way back. Is that like?
Yeah. Well, I found some guys. We used to listen to doo-wop music a lot. So we used to hang out in the parking lot of the restaurant we used to frequent, and we used to chirp, as we call it, harmonize. And we didn't do it for any real particular reason other than the fact it seemed to be a good way to meet girls. But eventually we realized that, we're as good or better at the harmonizing than some of these groups that we're hearing on the radio. And at that point, I guess we started to give it some serious consideration. I was in my late teens at that point. And I started to hit the streets of Tin Pan Alley, which is a section of Manhattan on Broadway, where there are a lot of buildings that house music companies, publishing companies, record companies, PR firms, production companies. If I walked into the offices of a publishing company, I was a songwriter. Record company, I was in a band. Production company, I was in a singing group. And then one day I walked into the offices of Bright Tunes Productions, which was a company owned by the Tokens, which was another singing group, a very successful one. They had huge hits like The Lion Sleeps Tonight or Tonight I Fell in Love. And they also produced other bands like the Chiffons, which was a huge girl group at that time. And they were impressed with me and Bobby Miranda, our lead singer, and offered us a job for $25 a week each. And they would give us a room with a piano in it, and we would write songs for them. And that was the start of it all. And we started to have some success by one of the songs that Bobby and I had written ended up on one of the Chiffon albums. This was like a really big deal to us, having a song on on one of the Chiffon's albums, which the Tokens were able to do because they were the producers. And then a song that one of the few songs that Bobby had written on his own caught the eye of the producer of Cherie and the Pacemakers, this English band, and they decided to record it, and it was going to be their a single released in the United States. Now, this was a really big deal because besides the producer producing Cherie and the Pacemakers, this guy also produced the Beatles. His name was George Martin, the producer. Well, this was just almost beyond belief. So now we're kind of in the game, you know, and people are starting to notice us. And the Tokens came from Brooklyn, New York, and they were part of a very tight-knit group of people that they either went to high school with or were friends of the people that they went to high school with. And this group consisted of Carole King, Jerry Goffin, Cynthia Weil, Barry Mann, Neil Sedaka, Al Cooper, Neil Diamond. This is quite a group of people. And they used to come by the Tokens offices all the time to either hawk their tunes or see if there were tunes that they could use for some of their projects. And Tokens always included Bobby and myself in the loop. And so we were starting to become viewed upon as up and coming songwriters, I suppose. And one of the stipulations that of the deal that Bobby and I made with the Tokens was if we were going to write songs for them, they would have to agree to produce our band, The Happenings, which they did. And that's sort of how all of this came about. And I guess the second recording session that we did with them included See You in September. And of course, that changed everything for us in our lives.
David Libert, when I read about that, and again, people my age, people older, probably some people younger, See You in September, as soon as I was reading about that in your wonderful book, Rock and Roll Warrior, David Libert, that it was like, I brought back a lot of memories. And of course, I started singing it in my head. Actually, I started singing it a little bit out loud, and no one wants to hear me sing. No one wants to see me dance. I love to dance. I love to sing. There's that old attributed African proverb, whatever, if you can talk, you can sing. If you can walk, you can dance. I'm the exception to both of those, as much as I like to do it. But I started singing it and getting that feeling. And then when I was reading about the success of that, when I read about See You in September, Rhythm exceeding 1 million copies, again, back then, anytime, but we can't really conceive of 1 million. What was that like for you? Over 1 million copies.
Actually, See You in September sold over 2 million copies.
Oh, God, sorry. Wow.
It was, you're only off by 1 million. It was, well, you know, it was you know, it was pretty mind bending. And it almost didn't make it. We actually didn't want to release See You in September as a single. There was another song that Bobby and I had written that we thought had far stronger commercial potential. But Mickey Eichner, the head of promotion, and he said, no, you got to release See You in September. I think it's a smash. And if we don't release it, it's a seasonal hit. If we don't release it now, we'll never have that opportunity again. And he was just unrelenting. He basically beat us into submission to release that song. And So they send out 3,000 promotional copies to every station, radio station that had a top 40 program format, and not one single station decided to play the record. It appeared to be an absolute disaster. So Mickey Eichner, the promotion guy, got on the phone and called WBCN in Boston, got on his knees and begged them to give it 3 weeks play. He just cashed in on whatever favors they may have owed him. And so they agreed. So the first week, nothing. Second week, a trickle. Third week, it starts to sell a bit. And so they decide to continue to play it. Give it heavier rotation. And while all this is going on, Mickey, the promotion guy, is calling every station within 500 miles of Boston, saying, Boston's on it, it's a big smash hit, you got to go on it. And he got a lot of other stations. Somehow or other, from sending 3,000 promo copies and not getting one station to add it, now we have a whole section of the country playing it. And then once WABC, the number one station in New York, went on, it was all over. Every station in the country added it, and they played it throughout the entire summer. And by the time September rolled around, it was number one on virtually all of those stations. So,
when you, David Libert, hearing your music, hearing you yourself on a radio, what's that experience? What's that like? You're driving, or you're sitting, or you're listening to a transistor radio. If those are old enough to remember the old little transistor radios, what's that like when they played your music?
Well, actually, when the promotion guy was getting all these stations to add it to their playlist, he got WMCA in New York to add it as well. This was a big deal. But he couldn't seem to get ABC, the biggest station, to add it. And this was a problem, because eventually, if ABC wasn't going to add it, everyone else was going to drop it, including MCA. And then our worst fears came to fruition. WMCA did drop it, and we're feeling horrible because we went through all of this only to end up in failure anyway. Well, our manager at the time had booked us into a club in Washington, D.C. That weekend. And as we're driving down there, we're mad at WMCA. So for spite, we're listening to WABC. And
I love that. Go ahead.
Just as we're starting to get out of the range where we can actually hear WABC, we hear, in typical AM DJ voice, hey, here's a new one by a band called The Happenings. It's called See You in September. I think you're going to like this one. And oh my God, ABC is playing See You in September. We went crazy. We just pulled off to the side of the road. We were screaming and crying and laughing and hugging each other. It turns out that ABC was, as a ploy, wasn't going to play until MCA dropped it, so that they could go on it and they would look cooler than MCA, because that was their competitor. And then, of course, without any fanfare whatsoever, MCA went back on it the next day, and virtually every station in the country went on it. So that was my first impression of the one that I remember the best of hearing it on the radio in a significant way, was when we're driving away from New York and hearing it on WABC for the first time. That was pretty overwhelming.
Oh, and we can't imagine. I hearing the story is beautiful. You being there and telling about it, just unimaginable, really, for the rest of us to feel like that and have that feeling. I'm talking with David Libert, rock and roll warrior, my misadventures with Alice Cooper, Prince, George Clinton, Living Color, the Runaways, and more. Again, if you can get an autographed copy, and you can get the book everywhere and everywhere online, but rockandrollwarrior.com. Of course, we've got those links up. rockandrollwarrior.com. The progression from there, tell us a little bit about that. Obviously, I want to talk about Alice Cooper, George Clinton, so many more, Prince, etc. What from there? Where from the happenings from See You in September?
Well, the happenings came into popularity right at a time when the whole music universe was kind of changing. For instance, FM radio, which was basically an unlistened to radio frequency band, all of a sudden became the conduit for all of these new types of bands that weren't very AM friendly. They were far more album oriented, and they wrote their own songs and played their own instruments. I mean, the happenings evolved into being a band where we wrote our own songs and played our own instruments. But we started out as basically a singing group. And I wanted to evolve as well. I wanted us to apply the thing that we did best, which was our harmony techniques, to more contemporary themes and structures, sort of what Crosby, Stills, and Nash was doing at that particular time. And the other happenings really wanted none of that. They felt that they could play nightclubs and colleges, which is what we were playing at the time. They could do that for the next 20 years without have to rely on any hit records. I saw it as almost a definition of obsolescence. So I decided to leave the happenings. And at that point, I was sort of managing the band. We were managing ourselves, and I assumed practically all of the managerial duties, dealing with the record company, the concert promoters, the booking agency. And while this was going on, I'm saying, I could leave the happenings and maybe manage other bands or do something else in the music industry. I was pretty sure I couldn't be a happening forever. So when they didn't want to change and I did, I felt it was time for me to leave. And over the next couple of years, I did a couple of different things. I worked for a management company. I was the house booker for this club out in Long Island. And then I got a job as road manager for Rare Earth. You remember Rare Earth?
When I was reading that again, all the songs come back to me. I started remembering. I hadn't thought about Rare Earth in quite a while, and all coming back. I absolutely remember Rare Earth.
Well, that was a pretty cushy job. They were a great bunch of guys. They worked basically weekends. So I was able to live in New York, advance the dates from my apartment, and then on Thursday night I'd fly out to Detroit where they lived, and then the following morning we'd fly out to do the gigs that weekend. After the weekend, I'd put them on a plane back to Detroit, and I'd fly back to New York. A pretty nice, cushy, easygoing job. They were a great bunch of guys. They were fun to hang out with. They put on a hell of a show. And then I did that for several pleasant months. And then one day I got a call from Johnny Podell, the booking agent for Alice Cooper. And he said, the band is looking for a tour manager. Would you be interested? And I did. I got hired. And I remember that first night was a gig in Atlanta, my first night on the job. And their manager, the legendary Shep Gordon, said, David, just observe, pay attention to what's going on. You'll get the hang of it. It just seemed insane to me. I thought I made the biggest mistake of my life, quitting Rare Earth and going with Alice Cooper. It just seemed to me, my first impression was 30 or 40 insane, crazy looking people just crawling all over the gear and the equipment, like giant insects. And I thought I made a horrible mistake. But as it turned out, after a few days, I did start to get the hang of it, and it all kind of fell into place. And it turns out that these people, as nuts as they look, were very professional, very dedicated to their jobs, and had and worked really hard, and it all kind of fell into place. And I became one of them. I became part of the family, and it turned out to be just a life-changing job for me. I ended up having Shep Gordon as my mentor. I would say 99% of what I learned about the music business, I learned from Shep Gordon. And of course, a little bit from Johnny Podell, who probably was the greatest agent that ever lived. So that was the foundation that I was able to garner working 4 years for Alice Cooper. It meant everything in the end.
When you and Michael Russo who's listening about Rare Earth, it's interesting when people like would have thought Michael that would have been much younger and not remember. It's interesting how some people, regardless of age, remember some of the bands in Rare Earth. I know people my age and older would know Rare Earth, yet younger people, it's wonderful. And younger people that have weighed in about the happenings that I know are younger than I. When you, again, with your background, what fascinates me about you, David Libert, is the fact that you develop the skills in process while you were doing it, not having a lot of background experience. And you talked about your dad being a lawyer earlier and the music and that. When you think about that, I mean, here you're doing Alice Cooper, you're doing Rare Earth and learning along the way, correct? Is that?
Yeah, I decided very early in all of this, I'm going to try to acquire as much knowledge and experience as I possibly can, because if I want to stay in the music business, I can apply that knowledge and experience to whatever it is that I decide to do. To be in the business and not be a performer. And at this point, I wanted to stay in the business. I loved the music business. It was a lot of fun. It was challenging, all those kinds of things. And I just came to the conclusion, the more knowledge and experience I can acquire, the better it will be for me to be able to earn a living in the music industry.
I also, I mentioned to you before, and I've said about the book, I love the pictures, how you've got some of the old pictures, the happenings, you young, very young, and included in the book, and some of the what with Alice Cooper, etc. Rock and Roll Warrior, My Misadventures with Alice Cooper, Prince, George Clinton, Living Color, The Runaways, and more. David Libert's book, available everywhere online. Libert, David Libert. rockandrollwarrior.com, rockandrollwarrior.com. That experience with Alice Cooper and that tour and written about, how many years ago? Decades and decades ago. You prominently mentioned in that book, that had to be quite an experience for you, that In Dollars Baby, Bob Green's book.
Yeah, I think Bob Green wrote a great book, by the way. It was, it's funny because I never thought about writing a book, and I never really thought about what I was doing. I was just sort of focused on my job. I mean, I knew it was a cool job. I was traveling with the biggest band in the world, and we would lease a big airplane to travel from town to town, virtually all over the world, and having a hell of a time in the process, having a great time and having a lot of fun and really enjoying the whole thing. But just doing it every day, day by day, you didn't really focus on the overall picture. You were sort of, at least I was, focusing on what it was that I had to do to do my job. It's only really looking back many years later in retrospect that I sort of saw the whole picture of what it was and realized what an amazing adventure it really was. I mean, I knew it was cool at the time. I just
Sure.
never gave it a lot of thought because I was too busy doing my job, I
Doing your job.
suppose.
Yeah. When you look back and get the big picture, and you'll get that big picture when you read Rock and Roll Warrior, rockandrollwarrior.com. With that, again, touring, like you say, you were in it. So you were in it. It's hard to get perspective. And years later, again, in writing this book, if I may ask, what actually made you put pen to paper or sit down at the computer, however you started to write the book, what was it that said, I got to do this. I'm doing it now.
Well, a lot of people over the last several years say, David, you really ought to write a book. You got some great stories. You've done some, really fascinating things. I never really gave it much thought, really. And then about 3.5 years ago, my girlfriend Angie says, they're right. You should write a book. You do have a story to tell that people will find interesting, and that was, I suppose, the inspiration for me to sit down and figure out how to write the book and start to write down things that I remembered, and taking pages and pages of notes, and then it was a 3.5 year process from beginning to end. And I devised a process by which I could write things down. After taking all of those notes, what I would do would be just to sit at the computer and spit it all out, sort of like a flowing stream of consciousness without any regard to how I was saying it, or grammatically correct, or just get it all out. And then you could simply go back later on and try to format it into, properly, to properly put it in order. So basically it was just this free flowing stream of consciousness that got it out of me onto into the computer, and then fix it all up. I wanted the book. Look, I wanted the book to. I wanted it to be. I didn't want it to be this salacious tell-all.
Yeah.
Sex flying all over the place. I mean, there's a little bit of that.
Yeah, it's good.
It's rock and roll. Can't really avoid it. But that's not what I wanted the theme of the book to be. I wanted it to be informative. I wanted it to be funny, and I wanted it to have a certain flow to it. So I wanted it to sound like me, I suppose. And in that respect, I think I was able to accomplish that.
Well, from a reader's perspective, absolutely. And I love the flow of the book, that book, Rock and Roll Warrior, David Libert's new book, available everywhere online. You can order an autographed copy from rockandrollwarrior.com. When I read the acknowledgments and what you said about Angie, about you want to thank her first, inspired me to write the book. What I love is that people over the years saying you should write it. You should write it. But that tipping point was Angie.
Well, when she says something, I listen, because most of the time she's right.
Yeah.
And and also disagreeing with her about anything is not the greatest idea in the world. So I've learned to take what she says, to give it its due seriousness, due diligence that it requires. And she was right. I mean, writing a book turned out to be almost an overwhelming endeavor. It's not as easy as it looks, and if you want to do it right, had I known what it really entailed, I'm not sure I would have done it in the first place. Of course, I'm glad that I did, and
you're glad you got it done.
All that. But I have Angie to thank for this really becoming a reality.
It's beautiful.
I'm grateful.
It's beautiful. A saying that it's harder than it looks, or what it seems very challenging to me to be able to do that. Your memory, either you've got to have really, really good notes, a journal or something from many, many decades, or an excellent memory, or a combination, I guess, maybe. Yeah. You tell me.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's amazing I can remember anything, but
I hear you.
somehow or other, I wasn't able to. I think there are certain things that your mind remembers, monumental or momentous occasions of once, or something that you found incredibly amusing, or something that was life changing. I mean, when you sit, at least for me, when I sat down there to start to write down notes and things that I think should be in the book, a lot of stuff came back to me. And so deeply embedded in my mind was all of this stuff. And it just needed a procedure for it to come out and put it down on paper. And I did. I came up with a procedure to take all the notes and then take the notes and turn it into stories, and try to make it all sort of match with a certain flow to it. So
it's kind of fun.
I'm being a excuse me, being an ex-tour manager, I'm a fairly organized guy. I'm sort of the nuts and bolts guy of the creative aspects of touring and management and being a booking agent, all these things that I did. And I think that it was that organizational abilities that I have that was very, very helpful in getting it organized to be able to write a book. So I guess I possess that quality.
Obviously you do. And what you've done with your career, and like you say, the organization, that's something I never had, and it's getting worse. The older I get, the organizational skills, what little I had are rapidly fading. I want to tell people that behind, you're in a room that's got all kinds of awards on the wall for listeners.
Let's hope I don't have to smelt them down someday, Louis.
I don't think you're gonna need to do that, but that's unbelievable. I mean, it's just filled with them.
Well, if you're in the business long enough, I suppose you accumulate these accolades. And
that's modest. I think you're being very modest.
Well, they represent different portions of my life. These two here are the two happening singles. I got Rhythm and See You in September. That big one back there. Let's see, this one right here.
It's pointing at
Guns N' Roses. That's a multi-platinum album award for Appetite for Destruction, and the rest are Alice Cooper, George Clinton, Bootsy Rubber Band, Vanilla Fudge, Living Color. What else?
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic, David. You're cool time-wise again, correct? We're good for...
We're good for the Walsh.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening, top of the hour. I'm going long today. You're listening to Louis B. Free Radio Show, Brain Food from the Heartland, copyright B. Free Radio Limited, 2022, produced by lovely Miss Bunny Face in cooperation with White Rabbit Productions. Louis B. Free Radio Show, Brain Food from the Heartland is an adult-oriented show intended for and only for a mature adult audience. Listener discretion is strongly advised. I'm having the pleasure and honor of talking with David Libert. His new book, Rock and Roll Warrior, My Misadventures with Alice Cooper, Prince, George Clinton, Living Color, Runaways, and more. Again, you can go to, for an autographed copy, rockandrollwarrior.com. The book is available everywhere and everywhere online. I hope you don't mind if I ask you this, but do you mind telling me your love story, you and Angie, the love story? You okay with that?
Yeah, sure. I went to a party. This is 24 years ago, by the way. And there was a dog at the party. Anyone that knows me knows that I used to give voice to my beagle, Dolly the dog, who, by the way, has her very own chapter in the book. And, I would say things like, you got any food? My master doesn't feed me. I wouldn't kid you about a thing like that. So I gave voice to this dog at the party, and she found it rather amusing. And that's how we met. And we've been together ever since. So yeah, so a dog played
See, there it
you
is.
know,
There's that theme again. The dog, right? The animals. That's beautiful.
yeah, yeah.
I,
But you know, that was I put a chapter of Dolly in the book because I thought it would be funny, and also it was and I thought it would be amusing. And one of the things was when I took the job with Alice Cooper, uh, part of the deal was, and they all lived in this enormous sort of dilapidated mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut. And the deal was when I went on tour, Dolly the dog would be left at the Galicia estate, the mansion. It had several acres of fenced-in property, and there was a property manager to take care of all of the pets of the band and roadies. So Dolly the dog would be in good company while I was on tour. She would be well looked after. She'd had other well socialized dogs to play with, and that was the deal. And I guess the joke was, yeah, I gave voice to Dolly. You know, a dog can say uh, things that I could never get
never
away with.
say,
First,
yeah.
I was on the first date. Of course, this is before I met Angie. Dolly could say, "So, so you're going to sleep with him tonight?" You know. And now, if I said that, the date would be instantly over. You know. But Dolly apparently could say anything and get away with it. So I
Love
had a
them.
lot of fun. Uh, you know, giving voice to my dog and being able to say things that I
You'd never,
could never say to
never get away.
people.
Yeah.
And it was amazing that you would watch perfectly intelligent, um, mentally sound people engaged in a conversation with a beetle.
I get, I think I get that, what you're saying, especially when it's your voice. I think we all do that with animals where we our pets, our furry family members, we all kind
Yeah,
of imagine what we talk with them and hear what they would be saying back. And I love that. But I like the fact that you could get away with it and how that brought,
right.
that's a beautiful story. I have to again mention how wonderful it is with the pictures that you have obviously saved and included in your book, Rock and Roll Warrior. The picture of your home that you grew up in, your mom
Yeah.
and dad, that's a beautiful picture. You as a kid, and I love the one, did I really look this dorky at 15 years old? I mean, it's just, some of them are just, all of them are just amazing. And I'm delighted that you kept them and included them in the book. A lot of,
Yeah, I am too. You know, my editor, Susie Michelson, said, let's put as many photos as we can related to the book, because not only does it sell, but it'll make the book, you know, a lot more interesting and fun for the people. So there are actually 32 pages of photos stemming all the way back from, you know, when I was a child, all the way back, you know, through my days with the Happenings, Alice Cooper, uh, the Runaways. You mentioned Stiv Bators. The
yeah.
Dead Boys were a client of my booking agency there for a while. Living Color, George Clinton, the Runaways, Vanilla Fudge. It's all in there, folks.
It's all in there, and it's wonderful. And like you were saying, the flow. Uh, David Libert, I'm an obsessive reader. I caught, and again, with respect to other books that don't have the flow, nonfiction book, obviously, if there's information I want to garner from it, I will push through it. But there's a big difference for avid readers, or as I refer to myself, an obsessive reader, when it flows like Rock and Roll Warrior does. It just, yes, I'm getting information, but in a very pleasurable way, a very interesting way. A real, talk about a roller coaster, a real roller coaster. I also love the picture of Dolly the dog, and I love that one picture with Gold Record and Dolly the dog. You've got those pictures in there, which are absolutely wonderful to see. Dolly, to absolutely see Dolly in there. We talked a little bit about Alice Cooper. I know there's so much that you write about Alice Cooper, but let's talk, if you don't mind, a little bit about George Clinton. How did that all come about?
Um, well, it turns out that when I was the road manager for Rare Earth many years earlier, the manager of Rare Earth turned out to be the manager of George Clinton. So I had that in. And, when I left the employ of the Alice Cooper organization, I was now living in LA, and I figured people will be breaking down my door to hire me with all this knowledge and experience I have under my belt. The answer was no. Nobody was breaking down my door. Nobody wanted to hire me. I went to record companies, concert promoters, publishing companies, PR firms. I went everywhere, management companies. Nobody wanted to hire me. I'm not sure why. Maybe it was just bad timing, or maybe I was perceived to be difficult, which I find absolutely hard to believe. Nobody would give me a job. I couldn't give myself away. Well, actually, Louis, that's not quite true. In the end, I could give myself away, and that's exactly what I did. Ron Strasner, who was the manager of Rare Earth, had teamed up with this guy, Charlie Basseline, and they were managing George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic and all the associated bands. And Ron said to me, David, we would love to hire you, but we're broke. We can't pay you anything. But if you want to come aboard, we got a lot of things that are about to break big time. Welcome aboard. And so I did my due diligence. I did my research, and I realized what was about to happen with Parliament Funkadelic. And I saw this was really going to explode into prominence. So I took the job for nothing. And after a couple of months, I noticed that one of the bands that they have associated with George, Bootsy's Rubber Band, featuring Bootsy Collins, was also going to be a really big thing that was going to break. And also, Bootsy was the support act for every Parliament Funkadelic gig. So I said to Ron and Charlie, why don't I open up a booking agency and I will represent Bootsy's Rubber Band? I'm pretty sure that I'd be able to survive until things got going if I was Bootsy's agent. And they said, go for it. I guess they were happy that I could do something that could actually pay me some money. And I couldn't get George Clinton right away because he was with the William Morris agency, but I could get Bootsy, and so I did. And I opened up the David Libert agency. George was impressed with the manner in which I was representing Bootsy, and after about 8 or 9 months, he left the William Morris agency and became a client of the David Libert agency. So that's how I started to build a clientele at the David Libert agency, and I ended up with the Runaways and Evelyn Champagne King and the Dead Boys, as you mentioned, and a few other acts. And a lot of people say, gee, the Happenings is so different from Alice Cooper, and Alice Cooper is so different from George Clinton. How does that work? Well, it works this way. Much of what I learned is applicable to any musical act. The logistics, the touring, it has really little to do with the genre of music that you're dealing with. And I like all kinds of music, so I was proud to represent all different kinds of musical acts. But what I had learned over the years until I opened up that agency, it was all applicable to all of these acts. It was music. It all seemed to work the same. So that's the answer to that question.
That's wonderful. And by the way, I love the picture that you included in your book, Rock and Roll Warrior, of you and Angie. I just thought that was very, very good. Some of the other pictures I just want to mention briefly, the one trying to organize everybody for the group shot. Got to get the book, folks. And again, in addition to what you write about, the pictures are fantastic. And I've got to mention, there it is, Rock and Roll Warrior, David Liebert's book, rockandrollwarrior.com. Got a great personality. Rock and Roll Warrior. I'm sure you've heard that before. .com. You can order an autographed copy or pick it up anywhere, everywhere online. Also, the Peter Sellers. I've got to mention the Alice Cooper, the Peter Sellers thing. I love Peter Sellers. So many of his movies, of course, the Pink Panther movies, and that Alice Cooper was a fan, and that was that.
Yeah.
When you were there, there's so many people. I mean, I can't even mention them all because the book is filled with great stories and some of the difficulties, some of the challenges that you've had.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose my life has been a series of ups and downs, high highs and low lows, and I included the low lows as well because it's part of my life, and those chapters needed to be included, I suppose, in my book in order for me to really give an honest portrayal of what my life was like. So the good, the bad, and the ugly, it's all in there, folks.
David, how difficult was it writing that, the difficult parts? How challenging? What was that? What was that like?
Well, I tried to be analytical about a lot of this stuff, try not to get emotional. And I learned that by being in the music business, I suppose. Try to leave emotion out of it. It was a reflection of my life, just like the good parts was a reflection of my life, and it really wasn't all that difficult to once you decide to put it out there, then the obligation is to write it as well as you can, and so that it's an honest portrayal. So that's sort of what I did. I approached it methodically and analytically, just to get the facts out and all of that, and to make it an interesting read. That was the point.
Yeah. Too often, I think people will write about just all the good things and kind of eliminate that, but we're really a combination of all that, the good, bad, like you say, and the ugly. And it's all in the book, Rock and Roll Warrior, My Misadventures with Alice Cooper, Prince, George Clinton, Living Color, Runaways, and more. And many, many, many more. And some of the things you learned, for me, again, hearing about some of the things, the memories, like you wrote about rare earth. I hadn't thought about rare earth in a while. I hadn't thought about See You in September since I was a kid, a teenager. Again, available everywhere and everywhere online. If you go to rockandrollwarrior.com, you can order an autographed copy, which I have, and I absolutely love this, and it's precious to me. I know I've kept you a long time. If you're up, I'm going to reach out to John, if you're our mutual friend. If you're up for a part 2, I could talk with you like forever. What an honor to have you on the show. Honestly, David Libert, it's been wonderful.
Well, it's been a pleasure. It's been a lot of fun, Louis.
Thank you.
This conversation we've been having, I've enjoyed it. So thank you for having me. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for writing the book. Again, because for younger people, for older people, for everyone wants to learn about the life, what you did, how you organized things, how fluid you were with changing, and may I say risk-taking? Yeah, I can say that. I mean, I just said it, but the way risk-taking.
You can say it.
Right? Yeah. David, thank you. I hate to say goodbye, but I know you got to split. Thank you so much. Thanks for writing the book. Most importantly, of course, I appreciate doing the gig that you did the gig with me, but writing the book is just wonderful. And I would highly recommend it. The flow, the information, etc. David Libert, thank you, man.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that, Louis.
It is absolutely a fantastic read, folks. Again, talk